All right. Hey, welcome everyone to the Man Talk podcast. I'm Julian, and my co-host is Jacob, as you're well aware by now. This is podcast number 13, and we're going to talk a little bit about our postgraduate experiences. So, all of our experiences that we glean from our workforce, our budgets, our personal lives, and just basically going over how life changed once we graduated from college in our respective engineering fields. So I'll just dive right into it. Jacob, what was your feeling graduation day, the day that you realized I've made it and that you wouldn't have to study anymore?
Graduation day.
Do
Oh,
you remember?
yeah, it was amazing. You're all done and you're dressed up in robes and you get to see your the friends you work so hard with for these last several years and oh, this is the family you never got to meet. Here they are, and then you're shaking their hand, and there's this real sense of value and respect for people you didn't have for, uh, or you just developed for the last 2 years. So it was so cool, and my family was there as well, and they took me out to dinner right after, and it sucked after though. I'd say right after, because well, all my friends were gone. We all went our separate ways to our families, and the my support group just decided it has come to a screeching halt, so to speak. So that part was kind of scary. Um,
Could you elaborate more on that transition from being able to hang out with all your buddies and friends, study buddies essentially, and genuine friendships that you've developed to starting your first job and not having those people around?
Sure. So it was a screeching halt at first, and then you had some people that were sticking around in summer. So it was kind of strange that summer 2014. But I'll set the scene for the height of senior year, spring 2014 for me. So I had all of my mentees, about 30 of them. I had contact with dozens of friends, you, of course, being one of them. And I had access to all of this network. I could go to the pool when I wanted to now because were finally slowing down where I could just focus on my senior design. It was great. It, Probably the most bliss I've had up to that point at 22 and spring 2014, the last quarter of chemical engineering. And to see all of that just come to a screeching halt and everyone goes to their separate jobs. So in my case, along with four other friends, we were able to secure a job with Schlumberger Oilfield Services within 2014 before we graduated. So we were just hyped. Job set. Now it's just about finishing school. Life's good. But once we actually had to start getting ready for that job is when we were at least for me, I was starting to get a little nervous. Um, because I knew it was going to be a life changer. It was going to be a new adventure. I'd have to start all over again. So, July 2014, I see my cousin get married in San Francisco, and the next morning, I'll tell the story, I guess. So, I'm going into a taxi, and I've got my mom, my aunt, and a couple other folks there, and this is the taxi that's going to take me to SFO so I can fly into Sugarland, Texas. And I remember it was like being sucked into a vacuum. I hugged them goodbye, and then I put my baggage in, and then before I knew it, it felt like I was sucked into a vacuum, and my whole new life began. And that I got really scared. So this is July 2014, and I got scared, afraid, sad, scared, happy,
Vulnerable.
vulnerable, all over the place. I'm a mess right now. I'm keeping composure, but inside it might as well be a ping pong ball bouncing all through my body. And then I got to orientation for my job in that summer, and that's when everything started. So orientation for Schlumberger, getting into the frac field, getting to where I was going to start which was in Williston, North Dakota. And that all was started around that summer, and just life was just so different 3 months ago. What was it like for you? I never really got to hear your story either.
It's not as impactful, I would say. It's more somber in the sense like I was happy that school had ended because I did an additional year, so 3 additional quarters to round out my 5 years of education. So by the time I had my graduation date in spring of 2015, I was, I guess, not super excited, but just finally ready to move on into the next phase of my life, which would be working. But that spring was a good transition period from having a full workload to just taking like a class that I didn't really need. I just had to get units. So it's like during that time, I leveraged that as an opportunity to work more in my lab, and that had a good payoff because I had a lot of like extra time and I could just start working. And essentially, the role that I'm continuing to this day, although, two more with more responsibility behind it. So rather than this shock and awe moment of like all this emotions hitting me at once, it was more like a nice little transition, smooth, relatively painless. Things didn't, for me, change too much. And when I hear my peers talk about or they don the nostalgia glasses for college, or like talk about um, the harsh transitioning, as you just mentioned in your circumstance, uh, relatively speaking, for me, things are pretty like smooth and painless, and uh, well, not as concerning to my psyche, because in the same sense, like, oh, why is that? Well, I didn't take as big of risk. I just more or less took the a path of least resistance and tried it out. And over time, meaning that summer, I'm like, oh wow, I really like this. I'm given a lot of responsibility. It's research. It's a job. I'm doing things that I'm interested in, and I seem to be accelerating up the ladder of responsibility very quickly. Well, I can remain loyal to this, and to this day, I'm still there. So they have a decent outcome of uh, whatever I gleaned from those first few months working on the job. So it's very very different from your experience.
Yeah,
And
yeah, it
and
was.
speaking of different, um, how much different from school and work were the two for you? Because for me, very briefly, uh, we basically threw out all of the 4 to 5 years of what we learned in uh, undergrad. Not literally, like there's maybe a day or two here or there from specific classes, but the beginning of my job was basically rudimentary arithmetic, following instructions, and then grunt work. So it's not like you need a 4 year college degree in engineering to do the work, which is fine. But it was kind of a breath of fresh air because you're like, oh no, I need to use all this. I have to remember all this again. It's like kind of, uh, but just starting out, no, more likely than not, you'll be given the simpler task. How about, at least for my field? How about in your case? Was it that like painless, as I would describe it?
So you're talking about, at least I think you are, about what was the transition of academia that could have helped you in your job versus what actually helped.
Uh,
It,
yes, I
okay, so
believe that's what I'm saying.
I
Yes.
wanted to just clarify that point. So let's talk about the academia and where it came from, because that's a totally it might as well be night and day. There's overlap, but here's what I'm going to talk about. So, theoretical. That's what academia thrives on. Theoretical. Heavy on the calculations. Heavy on the software. Definitely on the exams. They're really pushing that. And they're pushing it so much that we're actually relieved when it's over. And I was relieved too. But I wasn't so happy about losing friends, right? Or not getting to see them as often anymore. But super heavy on calculations and assumptions and getting everything organized in a 3-page long calculation, hard math, partial differential equations to, okay, that's great that you have this background in theoretical chemistry and chemical engineering and design of distillation columns and all of these wonderful things, but those aren't applicable to what Schlumberger needs, which is frac pressure, dealing with the rigs and not rigs because we're in frac, but dealing with the equipment such as the pumps, the high pressure manifolds, the bleed off points, sand chiefs, mixing up all of the materials and liquids. That wasn't quite what we were getting at in school. And the intricacies of each piece of equipment was also different. So the practical aspect and the specificity changed, where we were doing all kinds of stuff in school, but that's great, but partial differential equations isn't a good way to frame and solve the problem at hand. How are your personnel skills? Can you do arithmetic? Can you do supply chain work? And can you handle a client that's really mad because chances are they're always behind and it's cold? So, you had to learn a completely new set of skills that you didn't have before. As far as the math, though, that was a complete downgrade. I mean, you're not doing solve 3 different integrals that were combined with 3 different variables and 3 different boundary. No. What we need is get us hydrochloric acid in 12 hours, 4,000 gallons stat.
Yeah.
Okay. So
worry about the molarity later.
Yeah. The bulk plant's got the right molarity. They should know what we're talking about. Cool.
Yeah.
Call them up. We need you to put an incredible amount of bactericide into all of our water tanks. Could you help out? Sure. We need you to help direct the sand chiefs so that way they connect to the right bins, so that way the sand goes to the right place. So when the operator pulls the lever, he doesn't get an empty bin. He gets the sand that we asked him to deliver into the hopper. Okay. So, yeah, not so much on the math. I mean, arithmetic is everyone uses it. That's why it's important. But the frame of calculus or doing the assumption models, all that's really the framework for design. And then design has its own specificity that you'd have to learn on top of what you learned at school to meet the frame of the job. Because you're trying to fit into what they're already doing instead of reinventing the wheel and turning the company in a completely different direction. So we did learn a fair amount about pressure calculations in frac that were cool. I appreciated that because that applied a lot to fluid mechanics, but really they had their simplified version of what they wanted us to do. So, and then when I moved into the pharmaceutical industry the next year, that isn't really dealing with a lot of math either. I think the mass balance is one, and maybe the emissions calculations, but really most of the job is you have to deal with people, you need to deal with path forwards, get the documentation correct, do we have the right instructions, and can you do the S factor calculation? So, 100 kilograms times our safety factor of 3.5, okay, 350 kilos, okay, sign and date. Can someone verify? Yeah, I was surprised about the arithmetic too.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I'm only going up to high school. Great, I can do this. I was trained for college, but I'm day to day is high school math basically. So okay, well, it should be pretty quick at this by now. Just break out your Excel sheet and then practice some automated functions in coding, and then click a few buttons, think about it for 30 minutes, click a few buttons, and then, well, you just did all your work that you were assigned for like a week because you learned some coding, which for me at least, I guess a big difference between school and work had to be in like, okay, well, in school you have arbitrary theoretical problems that I don't necessarily see the stickiness to how it applies to my job, right? But then once I started actually working, I'm given the problem and I'm like, okay, well, I have 1,000 Excel sheets that I need to find a specific data point. I could either do it by hand manually, one by one, or I can self study a little bit extra and figure out what necessary coding I need to just find that value, manipulate it how I need to, and then output an output that I need. It saves a lot of time, and if you have a good enough memory to memorize that, or you just save that general workflow, you can use it again. Um, which I guess shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone with a coding background, that you can take a lot of data and analyze it as long as you have the same methodology and approach to it. And silly as that may sound to me and during college, because I didn't get the bigger picture of it, it's very practical and very necessary when you're dealing with large data sets and actual work.
And keep in
So,
mind, the university wasn't trying to do this 100 times over and over and over again. What they were saying is we need you to expose them to as much nuance and novel engineering problems as possible.
yep,
So we may only take a certain slice of it once you're actually at a job. But granted, it's great to have this background of, let's say, heat transfer. This is actually something I really appreciated. So there's time dependent flow, convection, and that is equated to some sort of diffusivity or conductivity, and the reaction side. So there's four different components right there in your typical heat equation. And there's more theoretical ones if you want to expand it further, but for practical, those four things are really handy just to understand proportional relationships. So
yep,
less on the PDEs, more on the right, convection works better than conduction in this case. Well, let's get a fan, you know, and then that part of the problem is solved.
yeah. You gotta just blow that heat around, get your oven to heat up to the temperature faster.
Granted, you also need, if you're talking about the rods themselves, conduction's the way to go, because you're not going to get anything to convect if you don't have those rods to conduct a fair amount of heat. But you also need the blower so that way it can go somewhere.
Yeah, that practical knowledge, I'm assuming the universities who teach these courses figured you glean from your internships and on the job training, which they are correct, to give them the benefit of the doubt. Though exposure to some of those things during college would be, like college classes would be, nice, be a very helpful, especially with stuff that you're allegedly supposed to know straight out of high school, which is like, I'm guessing Excel, because they don't have a specific Excel training course that I'm aware of. It's just, oh, take your Python, take your MATLAB. But what about the main tool that every engineer needs to know how to use? And it's like, no, you'll figure it out. It's not that complicated. It just sells. It's like, well, like for example, when I started, I didn't really know Excel that well. So I was doing everything by hand, and it wasn't the most efficient. And then over time, with each new task, I'm like, okay, I don't want to keep doing this by hand. So I had to do some self study and learn on the job, learning stuff that I'm assuming you learn in an introductory Excel class, which I didn't have in high school. and you can take at a junior college if you want to, but uh, especially when the university, especially the College of Engineering, doesn't give you credits for ECS 10, which is Intro to Computers, because they think that you already know computers being an engineering major. It's like, oh, okay, well, I
They
guess
thought wrong.
it's like not everyone's at the same Cupertino JavaScript Java programming level just straight out of high school. So you have this really big learning gap between a lot of people who went to schools that just didn't offer technical skills in their curriculum. So in terms of, oh, what did I wish I would have learned before starting a job? Definitely Excel better, and more programming concepts, because that saves me a lot of time if I can finish that work faster in a more automated way, because it's pretty repetitive otherwise. And I would have also liked to have learned um, stuff that I probably should have learned from working previous jobs, because it did also happen to be my first job. So I didn't really learn like customer service skills or like how to deal with people per se. I had my own ways of doing it, but it wasn't ever under the grinder of, oh, someone's going to talk back or yell at you if you don't do it wrong. Um, which my approach has always just been agreeable, agreeable, be agreeable. But if you're too agreeable, then people all over you. So I had to learn to counterbalance that with, okay, well, set boundaries, say no, be direct, learn the contractor speak. Don't what's that expression? Beat around the bush. Contractors hate that. They like the gruff, direct. Yes, no, yes sir, no sir. Uh, very concise sentences of know exactly what you want. There's no lot. There's no like hypotheticals here. They gotta lay the foundation today, and the concrete's coming.
Yeah, am I able to work today or no? That's actually a big one with contractors. Both the job I have now and prior. Um, if they're saying, well, you need to get a work permit and we're not actually ready for you yet, so you're not ready for me yet. Let's get this straight.
Yeah,
We can figure
you
out the
can't.
work permit today, though, right? Well, that's true. Okay, let's get the work permit going. I got guys to pay and I got other people to work for. So none of this crap about I'm not quite sure. No, we're gonna figure it out now because I need to go drive somewhere right now if I'm not working for you.
Yeah. So it's just a different mindset to hypothetical, theoretical college work, where if you don't have that experience of interning or working just in a normal job at like Target or a barista, then it can be kind of challenging to like learn how to just talk to people, which it's kind of that weird paradox where, oh, you're being trained to work in the workforce at high aptitude, right? But the social skills, well, there's no specific class in that besides mandatory communications, which is just kind of like uh, well, right off liability thing. Like, oh, engineers don't have.
Yeah. No,
Okay,
we gave them the class. It's all okay.
yeah, the
Yeah.
1/4 of class. Now you can communicate.
Yeah.
Great, we did our job.
We have your stamp of approval on that and your GE credits. You know, all taken care of, all ready to go. We meet the standards. It's okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
What?
once you cross that low bar, and you enter the workforce, you realize like, oh, okay, well, I get what they were trying to do. They're trying to round out the aspects of your degree that you're not going to be strong in. Communication. Oh, well, okay. Well, you just have to improve your collaborative communicating ability. But like on the job type stuff, like okay, contractors yelling in your face to just give them a direct answer. It's like, well, if you don't have that experience of being yelled at, to just speak normally, like tell it to them straight, then can be a little jarring at first. But if you had that before you start your first job, at like first career job, doing part time work, then it's like, okay, it's nothing. It's easy. So, what I would recommend everyone to do in while they're 16, 17, 18, when the pressure's low and the stakes are also low, uh, is to try out different, well, pseudo career paths where at least you learn how to interact with people if you don't know already from school, and you get your feet wet in the full time career stuff that you want to try to do. So in this case, if you're uh, doing some kind of civil engineering, you could try hand out helping with some construction crew, which there are many, or helping out a contractor, which there's also many. And you get at least the foreman's perspective at the high level if you're not doing the actual work, or the grunt work perspective of, oh, it takes this long to pour a foundation, or it takes this long to set up a frame. Uh, it that would work in a civil engineering context. For different fields, it may be kind of tricky. Like, oh, what? How you gonna pre find a pre job in nuclear engineering? Well, chemistry. You could try your hand out either interning or volunteering with other chemists and specialize in or watch a lot of YouTube videos on nuclear chemistry. I don't know. I can't really speak to that specifically. How about what do you think about that idea?
Well, I think you could speak perfectly well about in the civil world. Yeah, getting involved with like rebuilding homes, for example. Don't they run on volunteers down south, like when the hurricane hits, or and now they're
Yeah,
gonna
Habitat for Humanity. They
bingo.
take everyone they can get. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's cool because you do it for a time, and you get to see a lot of different problems. And if you really haven't done anything, and honestly, that's more on my side of the fence when it comes to construction, you really get to get exposed to a lot of that right away.
And on top of that, it demystifies the process. So when you actually do it, uh, you're not wet behind the ears, like getting up to speed. It's like, oh, build this retaining wall. Well, I've never built a retaining wall. I've only designed one. And then when you see a retaining wall built, you're like, oh, that's not too hard. You just have to, well, when you see it, you're like, okay, well, that's a lot easier than I expected. Because when you do the calculations, the theory, it's like, oh man, this is kind of tough at first. But then when you see it built up, it's like, oh, okay, well, not too bad.
Yeah, and then there's on the other side of the fence where oh you need 100 feet of pipe and you need 2 inches. Okay, here's your design charts. Cool. It's gonna be this thick and it's gonna have this material construction. We have the purchase order in hand. Very good. Then you find out that it's too small, and that's because someone in your team didn't communicate that they actually wanted a 4 inch line. Well, that's radically different than a 2 inch line. And this could happen with processes, for example. So in our case, you have a 1 inch line. They put that on for a slurry transfer. Are you well? Wait a minute. 1 inch cam lock? What are you doing? Do a 2 inch. You're gonna at least you need some flow. You need some more area so that we don't plug up. So sometimes you have an easy design where you might need to rethink a couple of things before you put it in place. And there are other examples with design that, oh, they designed this instruction to do it in this way. This is so restrictive. Is there a way we can make it more flexible where we can still get the same job done and maybe more effectively because I'm not worried about all these constraints? Can we just focus on one? Oh, temperature. Okay. So just temperature, not about flow rate, not about pressure, not about agitation. Cool. That's a lot easier to focus on than 4. And if we still get the same result, no harm, no foul. Um, there's some things I wish I got to do before um, leaving the academic world. But I was happy to find that Schlumberger actually did a lot of this. So they didn't do all that I wanted, but they did a good chunk. So dealing with contractors, they had an instructor that was designed to try and make your day bad. And I mean that. They were trying to get under your skin. They would push you. They would
Is
trouble.
that the inspiration for your simulation at your current work where you have the worst case scenario,
I mean,
which
it's more
is
about getting them exposed to it. It's not about doing a drill sergeant thing.
right.
So, more on the let's expose them in series towards getting involved with these worst case scenarios. As opposed to, oh, this is the ideal, this is my rinse pattern, this is my instructions, and that's it. That doesn't tell the new guy anything because they're there for what? Problem solving. So you need to give them practice with stuff that's already happened. That's the best way to do it. And we've already had this problem in oil as well. So being able to deal with people that are disagreeable, which a lot of people are in operations, being able to deal with contractors, uh, learning Excel more. I agree with you on that a lot. Excel was, I didn't have one class on it, and it was just one of those useful tools that just would come up from time to time. And nowadays I use it frequently. I'd say every day. Every day at work, yeah, I'd use Excel at one point or another for referencing or just even for keeping my information straight.
Same.
It's so useful to. Oh, so what did you do this last year? There you go. It's all on that one sheet. I've been logging it for the last year. I keep a.
And if you don't believe me, here's the other 3 years.
It's that simple. And then, oh, did you want some of the other side projects I'm working on? Well, here's this folder on the server, which we just learned intuitively, because we at least worked with some folders and stuff and working with computers, but working with a server was a little different because you had to learn the quirks of the server. But here's the folder that I've been working out of. There's everything I've been doing. And if you try and delete it, I already copied it to my desktop. Sorry. Just in case. Well, because once you get, and we talked about this earlier, people can be unpredictable. You never know if, and servers for that matter, you never know when, oh, all of a sudden you've got a folder that you can't access for a day.
No, I'm
Yeah.
laughing more so because that actually happened. One of our junior specialists, which is higher than an undergrad, managed to delete all of our project data. But since we store all of our project data on Box, we just had to contact Box and say, hey, it happened. Can you restore our folder, please? Folders? Because he somehow managed to delete everything.
Ouch.
And Box has a thing where they're like, okay, well, we have an image of your stuff, so we'll restore it. Bada bing, bada boom, no issues. So, in that similar vein, learning how computers work is extremely important, especially 2020 onward, um, because they're not going away and they're becoming more complicated with each passing. I mean, some aspects are simpler, but most aspects are getting more complex.
I heard about AMD doing a 64 core computer coming up.
Ooh,
So I'm running on an 8 core. And that was
yeah.
4 years ago when that was hip. So this is getting the technology, I gotta say, it's we need to start talking about that a little more just in work and in academic training because you're right, it's not going away and we can't just assume people are just going to use it and everything's going to work out. um, Even with the server thing with Box, we actually have Box too. We transitioned over to a local server to Box Drive a couple years ago. I think might have been earlier, but there were some files that couldn't transfer over, so we have to
Uh,
keep both servers now because there's this one team that has a particular, and I would say exceptional Excel file of keeping track of a particular process line, and it's based on S drive, which was our old drive, which is just a name, but
Yeah,
it was
we
just a
call
local
ours
server.
a Z drive.
Yeah, so okay, some automated letter that was given by the computer, fine. Um, so it's still stuck on this local drive, and there's no way they can transfer it. There's no way they can fix it. It's permanently glitched, and that made that particular team extremely angry because, well, it's a. I would say if I had to pick their most important Excel sheet, that's at least in the top three.
Yeah,
So that to them is you can't live without it on that process. So they were, and this is a process that doesn't change very often. So they were extremely angry, and it's still there right now, 2 years later.
wow, just
So
for one file.
one file.
Yeah,
There were other problems too, but that one was the most notable that I've actually heard people complain about, and they really were rubbing our IT department for, hey, we need this, and it. So now we just have two servers, but one of them's deactivated, and another one is what we use, and now it's all
yeah.
convoluted. So
Fragmentation in where you store stuff is very confusing. Just for anyone who wants to set up some kind of system, only use one as minimal as possible. Yes, sometimes you have to have your server local, but
and security.
and security, but if you can choose one, hopefully in our case, since we get unlimited storage being a research institution, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to have a limited storage 2 terabyte drive to a server rather to store our many terabytes of data. So the last thing I would add on top of, oh, what did I wish was taught that could have been applicable to the workforce is actually a class that is taught to civil engineers. Um, but I feel like it's very applicable to all fields, which is project management, uh, project scheduling, network scheduling, critical path method, all that basically timing and, well, organizing people in a very effective way. They kind of subspecialize that down to a specific major or majors. But in terms of being a project leader or lead and being, well, utilizing any kind of organization at your work where you're managing people, you kind of need to develop some kind of project management skill. So not knowing those tools exist can put you at a great disadvantage because then it's just a day to day off the top of your brain. Okay, what needs to get done? Instead, we have like the theory and the actual application fleshed out already. And it's really not too complicated. You don't have to get too bogged down in it. The main tools are pretty easy to use and user friendly. You can even make it one in Excel. So kill two birds with one stone. Learn Excel specifically for creating like Gantt charts. You know.
We use those from time to time. Yep. But we have a lot of. So the thing is, a lot of those aren't so useful if you're going to keep doing new stuff. Our
Yes.
company does a lot of new stuff. So it makes things rather complex, like the server thing. So trying to look in 5 different places, good luck. You'd have to, you wouldn't know. It's become more convoluted as time's gone on. I wanted to add about the operations school that I don't think I got to go too into, but the last thing I would say is this operations school that we got to do at my first job was so cool. It was 2 months of practical on the job training. Simulations were easier than the actual frac we were doing, but it got you a chance to experience it from multiple perspectives. Being the operator, being the pump operator, being the reactor operator, the supervisor. Being able to go through all four of those, you really get to see the problems that your team deals with. And then as the engineering staff, you do that on the side to show, okay, so you got to see what your team does, and you also got to practice your engineering job and designing the frac job and getting involved with how we were going to get this project to work. So you got to see some project scope there, and you also got to be put under the pressure of the operations field while still being able to design. So that kind of concept was slick. In our case, they made it a little tougher, and it caused a lot of people to not make it, which I thought was interesting because usually their failure rate's about 1 out of 6 people. In this case, it was 2 out of 3. So
Wow.
that was different. So not everyone takes lightly to that kind of training, but it does help separate out the wheat from the chaff. I'd say in that particular year, they were cutting a lot less wheat because they were really turning the cranks on getting the school to be even more effective and making sure they were getting some tough people and competent people. It was crazy. They had a 90-minute presentation and Q&A for our final. It felt like I was in grad school about a frac design we came up with 3 days ago.
Wow.
It was crazy. And they could ask you on anything in the 2 months. So it felt like that, but it also was getting us ready for dealing with bad clients and jobs that failed and pressure problems that you'd have in the line, or being able to troubleshoot on the fly, all that stuff. We got to do it all. And when we were actually out in the field, we got to do a lot of that stuff too. But again, simulation is only one branch. You really have to go do it to really fulfill the whole end of the experience. And
Of course.
but they let you do that. So you really got to learn. I mean, even for me, I was only there for about a year. They really got you to just dive into the deep end and get a lot of that stuff ironed out right from the get-go. So
Yeah. All that training pays off. Hence why they invest so much time and energy into it.
they do. I mean, that was an 8,000-mile trip to be on a student visa for 2 months to be overseas and then come back. I'm amazed that was even a thing. And then there are other companies that are just trying to move one day at a time. Their concept of project scope is not so great. And when I came back and I started seeing that the project scope was just all over the place, I'm used to a highly organized, almost tyrannical corporation where they just stomp on people. And then here they're doing the same thing in tyranny, but as far as their direction, it's just all over the place.
Right. So, in terms of your expectations about the workforce, would you say that when you first started, you had about the right level of expectations, or was it no?
No, no, not at all. They were completely crushed. I had no idea. It was so stark. I mean, but granted, it was an extreme time. We go in to this orientation with all these engineering staff that are new, and you're seeing a very biased picture there because everyone's new to this. And then you get out into your field of where you're going to work 2 weeks later, and then all of a sudden you've got all these crusty operators and project managers and just corporate bosses, and you've got to play the game of be corporate when you're in the corporate office, but be this absolutely rugged troubleshooter engineer in the field.
Yep.
It really pulls you like this because you can't really be that person at the same time. So what a lot of people did was you just leaned on one or the other. So I leant more towards trying to be rugged because that if you could get that down, even if the corporate guys are giving you a hard time, you could at least get to the solution. So I picked that one.
Right.
The expectations were all wrong. I thought, yeah, 5 years here, it's going to be great. Going to get some experience. I'm going to have a lot of adventure. And some were true. I got an adventure, but it came with a incredible
Stark
amount of
cost.
so
Yeah.
much, so many problems were coming up left and right that I didn't know what to do about so many of them. Uh,
Would you agree then that you basically laid out the alternative to that, which is simulation? So you would agree with the statement that try to expose yourself to as many different scenarios as feasibly possible before you run through the meat grinder, such that when you are run through the meat grinder, it doesn't really phase you.
yeah, so Jordan Peterson calls this, and I guess psychologists in general call it exposure therapy. So you get used to a lot of different things over time in gradual incremental progress. So simulations do that. And what I mean by simulations is we're going to put you in a thing that happened in the past, a situation, and we're going to put you in the shoes of, in this case, an engineering staff. And you need to be able to decide what's going on and how you're going to move forward. And then, based on the evidence given, that will be the cues of the right or wrong answer. And then when it's done, you cut the scene and say, here's what was going on that you didn't see, and this is what we're going to do to make sure you understand next time. So it's making you stronger with every situation. So every day they're getting a little stronger and a little more competent. And that's without having to experience it themselves. Because the best thing that can happen to you in the workforce is that you get to a problem for the first time, but you've heard of something similar and you can apply that to the problem that's happening right now that people aren't seeing. And
That
that is awesome.
that actually happens a lot in my job. So I've gained enough experience that I've seen similar. So here's a trivial example. Uh, One of our air compressors died today. The motor blew out. It wasn't compressing air anymore. So just a giant empty tank. And this same compressor had an issue before, and I replaced the valve on it, and it was working until today. So I'm like, okay, well, the reason I fixed it the first time was because I didn't know of a way to get air to the machine that needed it. Um, but then I thought about my options in our lab because I've been reorganizing everything along with the lab manager, right? And it occurred to me like, oh wait, another machine nearby doesn't have that requires air isn't operational at the moment. I can steal it. Um, the solution was actually pretty painless. Take Put aside the sad pressure vessel that's no longer doing what it's supposed to be doing, and just connect directly into the airline that's not being used that's nearby in a different room. That was the hurdle I needed to jump through. I needed to break down the lab in such a way that I didn't see it as compartmentalized rooms like a poorly structured organization, right? Where everyone's siloed off into their own thing. I need to realize, like, oh, wait, the lab is all interconnected and I can access any part of it. So, which is the most convenient to solving the problem now? Oh, that one air connection that's in this one room that I wouldn't be aware of if I hadn't had that experience of, oh, um, I need air. This machine's down. Where do I go? It's very trivial, but the same like mindset really helps when you're problem solving out in the field. Like I've had to do that so much where I'm out in the middle of nowhere and something goes wrong and I only have a MacGyver toolbox to try to solve the problem. And hopefully your toolbox has the necessary tools you need to solve the problem and just your creativity and experience to get you through it, you know?
You know, that was an interview question for getting into Schlumberger. They actually asked one of our friends this. It was from their interview questions template. They had a database, and it said, "What have you done, or do you have a MacGyver moment?" That
Uh,
was the question. And then you'd have to be put on the fly of how are you able to solve a technical, or in this case, a mechanical problem on the
Right.
fly.
Yeah. In this case, the solution was only like a 5-minute fix. So when I first fixed that pressure vessel, it was a 45 minute fix because I had to find the valve to replace the connector because the other one was rusted out because we don't have a desiccant on it. So it's pumping in watery air into our machine, which probably isn't that good for it. But the machine's cooking at 190 C, so I don't think the water cares too much. Not gonna, not really gonna rust out the machine as much as what happened to the pressure vessel, which I'm assuming it got rusted out because it didn't have an intermediary connection. But uh, yeah, essentially just making MacGyvering stuff, making stuff work. That's a very important skill to develop. And you only do that through exposure therapy and experience on the job, really,
So
or your own curiosity.
now I'm transfixed by your compressor problem because so we actually have a dryer that would probably help you with that. So if you had an intermediate dryer to make sure the air would collect all the moisture, and then
So we have dryers,
you do
just not
okay.
not on. So that the reason we were using that was a temporary solution because our machine that uses the air had to get moved from a different room that had an air supply that had dry air into this side room so we wouldn't breathe the noxious fumes because of bad lab design. But that's a whole nother story. So this was supposed to be a temporary solution that's been going on a year.
Yeah, more people do that than they'd like to admit. I know we've done that too. Rob Peer to pay Paul, and then pay Paul again, and then you got Eventually, you got all these.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So we have the technical know-how of doing it correctly the first time, so we don't blow out vessels with rusting them out, basically. But the just the interconnectivity of the lab is pretty complex now because each room has its own subspecialty, and some rooms have like shutdown issues because of OSHA and other stuff because too much fumes or something, and they're inspecting that. And then other rooms are all dialed in and are great, so you can't really steal from it per se, steal like their resources, meaning their connections and whatnot. So it's almost there. I think we're at 90% as an entire lab, aside from the rooms like dialed in. So that's good.
yeah,
So yeah, any other like knowledge that you think would have been helpful before you were dumped in the deep end?
yeah. So they didn't do anything on interviews. We
Oh
had to
yeah.
just learn that on the fly. Uh, th- how about you? Did you feel that was a little hot when you go for an interview for a job, or to me, I'm going. Okay, I read the questions. I was able to at least find that much because you're really just kind of scrambling at this point, and you just got to know your resume and okay, be know how to talk to people. Okay, I could do those three things, and then I got jumped into the interview process and just kind of rolled with it. There's got to be a better way than that, though. What did you have anything similar happen to you?
So I'm in a strange position where of the jobs that I got a job, I had no formal interview process.
None.
None, yeah. And the jobs that I did not get a job, I had a formal interview process.
Oh,
So, oh, I lied. There's one formal interview process which I knocked out of the park, but that's also because I had been on the interview board and I've worked on those questions.
no,
So,
you're the inside man.
yeah. So, I guess for people just starting out, you want to try to get as much insider information as you can about the company you're interviewing for, which say you're in like tech, they have those books on coding problems that certain companies ask you to solve. And the goal isn't necessarily to get the question correct, but to understand your mindset and workflow to get to the right answer.
Yeah, at what rank and what competency level are you at that you could probably handle what we've got at our job?
Correct. And in that one job where I had the interview and I knew the questions, uh, it very much helped to have all that background information already so that I didn't have to memorize anything per se. I just had to speak my mind as if it was second nature, which is a pretty powerful ability if you're able to bring that into an interview process. Because I don't know if this is arrogant or whatever it may be, but I'll say
Oh,
it
I'll let you know.
regardless. But if you can bring something to the interview process that your interviewers don't know, like in terms of knowledge or expertise or experience, that potentially can set you apart from the rest of the interviewers who may be kind of stumbling through and not knowledgeable, or being able to bring either personal experience or just industry knowledge that might be useful to you. Um, so being able to express that new information that might surprise them could be advantageous.
Could be.
Like, could be. It depends on which toes you're stepping on when you speak. But so very briefly, I had a meeting with higher ups for the transportation agency, right? And uh, this several times this has been brought up, but our research is discovering something that no one's really thought about in terms of like tar binder petroleum properties, right? When it comes to pavement performance. And every single time it's mentioned, like it is a factor, it's significant, it affects your pavement's longevity. There's always one gray silverback person in the room who goes like, "Oh wow, really?" And it's like, oh, "Okay, cool. It's novel, it's new, it's important, and it's a simple concept." Meaning it's like a very how you say, like
Less likely to
lo-
break.
not break, but uh it's not novel. I would say it's more so unexpected and so much of a trivial thing that you wouldn't really think about it because you have too many other fish to fry. But it's also a fundamental thing. So I it's kind of hard to explain an analog, but essentially um what it is, just to get it out there, is when you store binder mixed with aggregate, so you have your asphalt product in a silo for longer than a set amount of time, you're changing the properties of the binder such that it becomes stiffer, generally speaking, which you lose the life of the pavement basically due to fatigue cracking. So, in layman's term, that just means your fails quicker because you're letting it cook longer, and that's bad. But a number of like higher ups aren't aware of this. So the research is useful in that sense because it's illuminating something that's been an oversight probably in the industry just because no one really considered like, oh yeah, it's a time temperature relationship. So if you're able to,
Decomposition's a thing.
yep, and if you're able to communicate the importance of why that is good for your bottom line as like a city or a state transportation agency not to cook up your pavement too quick, then you can save a lot of money. And just knowing that one little tidbit of information because you have the research experience can be very invaluable. And people would want to do more research with you to figure out more. Oh, why is this thing a thing? Let's give you money. You figured out that other thing. We've saved so much money now.
So, from what we've been able to gather so far, getting ready for exposing yourself to different things, uh, being able to be cool with people. And one way to practice that's with your friends. I mean, just being able to make good friends and continue to make those relationships in college, that helped a lot in industry. Being able to develop trust, people are still people. So being able to develop trust is important. And then excel in some of the more fine tunings of the job that could apply, such as just knowing your, not just arithmetic, but being able to articulate a lot of your job criteria beforehand. So getting a lot of that already into a pot, that'd be a great idea. And I'm glad we did some of it. I was ready for some of it, but not to the extent that I thought I needed it. So the practice just took longer. So those first 2 years in the workforce really was more cumbersome than if we had a lot of this simulated out through life experience or with mentorship or whatever. So moving down the line, Julian, what was some financial knowledge that unexpected financial knowledge you needed to learn once you finally started to keep the bill collectors at bay and you had a job and things really started to flatten out?
Well, for me, it was creating a budget. Obviously, if you're in college and you're on a restricted budget already because you have student loans, then that should be second nature to you by the end of your freshman year. But if in my case, most things were covered for, I didn't have to take out loans, fortunately, which I'm thankful for my family to have covered. Um, so once I was starting to get like a regular income, it's like, oh, okay, well, how much money do I have each bi-weekly paycheck? Oh, this much? Okay, how much food can I eat out? How much food can I cook in? Amazon purchases, blah, blah, blah. And there's plenty of tools out there to help with budgeting. I use a combination of spreadsheets like Google Sheets Google Sheets and Mint, which is an Intuit software. So I also use Intuit for TurboTax, which is very convenient. Let's put it mildly, so you don't have to navigate like a paper form. And yes, it costs a little money, but you spend like 4 to 6 hours doing your taxes on software specifically designed to flesh out all the possible scenarios you could run into. Or you make a mistake on your paper form and then you get audited. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Did that happen to you?
Yeah, it did. And it's usually not going to happen the first year out of school because guess
Yeah.
what? You've got that 6 month period where you're getting taxed. Not the same. It's when you get to your first full year of taxable income. That's when you got to watch out. And I would recommend get a broker, get somebody who's going to do it because for us, I mean, it's somewhere in $120, I think, for us for the our particular taxes person. And it's, if it weren't for them, I wouldn't know how to handle the IRS to begin with. So really important that you record everything because chances are, if you're like what happened to me, you're going to be 23, single, and a guy. So they're going to be, ooh, okay, a single incomer filing, it's time to tax them a lot. So, and they did. They taxed me quite a bit. So, and it takes a while because with the IRS, you will find that their concept of arithmetic is not the same that we learned in school. It's based on these adjustment factors and these rather manipulated ways of essentially stonewalling you into the point where you get frustrated and you just pay them whatever they say that you owe them. And that's important to remember, that it is negotiable, even if it is frustrating. They will eventually run out of steam if you get to a right number. The question is, how the heck do you get to a right number? That's when it really helps to not get there in the first place and track every cent that you made and make sure that you give it to your broker. And everything is going to pan out because you gave them exactly what you made. And I mean that with 401ks, even if they're not, even if they're like an IRA where it's not taxed yet. Just tell your broker everything. Tell every single penny where every single penny is, because that will make your life so much easier when in the event the IRS decides to audit you, because you already had everything in a row. You're not scrambling to try and find, like me, where all of this was organized. And it took a minute. And it's very stressful. It's like a few months of it. So, word of the wise, get a broker or do it yourself on TurboTax. But if you're going to do it either way, record every cent. I would recommend the broker because they can negotiate on your behalf. TurboTax doesn't necessarily do it on your behalf. So,
right. So these days, does that imply that you record every single like bank transaction, or how do you record everything?
So I too use Excel for this. So every transaction by credit card is organized by purchase number. So there's a column of just, this is an expense. So from $10 spent on Amazon to $1,000 for a new phone. All those expenses from the credit cards are all listed. So I type them in. It makes me do two things. One, I actually have to look at what I spent. I have to physically type in each one for that reason. If it auto-populates, I'm going to get complacent and I could just put it to the side. I want to actually look at it. Two, I want to see my expenses show up before me throughout that month. So at the end of the month, I go, oh, that was a little much. Why? And it makes me think of the question, was this necessary? And much to my surprise, a lot of the time it was yes. So 80% of the time I might be saying yes, and that's a good indicator of, okay, I am spending what I thought I was spending. Where's the deviation? And then you can adjust from there. And now you actually have a reference point versus I just spent $35,000 this year and I can't remember every single item. So
Your bank statements would help in that, right?
they are imperative. I couldn't do it without them.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it without them. That is where I get my information from. There isn't any other way.
Right. Everything's logged too, so that makes it more convenient.
And then I got graphs too. So you'll like this. So I have an expected value that's like this. And then I have, so those are my expenses for the year, and it's organized by month. And then I've got my real time spending, whether it's too much, too little, and it's curving around that line. And then I have the rate at which I spend, which is below it. So I can see the spikes. And the spikes help me find out where the expenses were high, and then the spending curve in general shows what I'm actually, how far I'm deviating. So I like it. I like it a lot because then it shows what stuff came up that was unexpected that you can plan for the next year.
Which is good. It's a very methodical and born out of due diligence. Plus, I'm sure being audited is no fun.
It's not. It makes you feel like a criminal, to put it in layman's terms. So you feel like you did something wrong. You don't quite know what's going on. And it's because it was it's not the way I talk to somebody if let's say so-and-so owed me money. Like, let's say they owed me $1,000. I wouldn't talk to them with a letter and not say anything on the phone and hand it to them with this really aggressive, you owe this much. And they have all these tables too. So it makes it kind of hard to figure out what the actual value is. So it's pointing in 5 different numbers and you're trying to figure out what they want. To me, it was a complete catastrophe. I don't know what they want. I know they want money, and I think it's the value that's at the bottom, but then they change it if they sent me multiple letters. That's the thing. Because we're trying to figure out what value they actually want.
Yeah.
And that's where the broker came in handy. That was so important because on my behalf would say, no, I did the numbers. This is what it should be. Then they'd send another letter. and then oh, the number went up. Whoa, what happened? And then they'd have another. Seriously, it was like
Yeah.
that.
Wow.
So just don't get there in the first place, man. It's one of those. It's like getting divorced. Just don't do it. Just steer clear of it. Steer clear of and record every single transaction, and it all will be well. So any accounts that you have that were accruing interest that you didn't know about, call your family, figure this stuff out. And you're going to want to figure it out that first 6 months before you get onto your full taxable uh, income year. So that's the first thing I do.
So January 2020, it'll be all figured out.
Yeah, because well, tax season's coming, and they don't want you submitting it in April. They want you submitting it in as soon as humanly possible. So for me, that's about February, because that's about the time when the banks actually have all their statements, and I get it ready and I send it over to my broker, and then it's red as rain if I gave them everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to be put in that auditing situation, though. In my circumstance, it's probably not true for everyone's circumstance. I can backtrack and pretty straightforwardly figure out all of where my expenses are because of how everything's set up. Granted, it's not to the level of granularity that you have set up, though. Based off of what you're describing, it's probably better safe than sorry.
Oh, I'm tired of it. I want to just be. What's your safety factor on a bridge? 10. That's what I'm doing. Just safety
Actually,
factor.
there's a bunch of safety factors on
Main. Yeah.
different specific components, but yeah,
Just
it's
something
it's
that
high.
won't break. It just
Yeah,
won't break. That's what I want. And that's why I like simulation, because I want people to just feel like they can handle anything that comes their way. So now you've got yourself good employees. You got people who understand their budgets. It's a good thing. Um, I have a feeling your budgeting experience was not anywhere associated with getting audited or any of that. I have a feeling it was easier for you.
yeah, very much so. I just, like I said, open up TurboTax, answer all the prompts to the best of my knowledge. So I should be aware of what I'm doing, right? I'm not hiding anything to my knowledge. With the new interest rate, like accounts I have, or taxable accounts for opening up like a checking or savings account, you have to report that. So I'm aware of that. So come tax season, oh, you got $500 for opening up a checking and savings account. Well, that's taxable income. So you gotta print out your W-4, I think, or something, and then declare your interest that you made in that year, and then pay taxes on that.
Right. So there's that. And then I'd say another thing, if you sell anything, because you might find yourself trying to let go of some things from college that you don't need anymore, that is taxable income as well, up to a point. So was it somewhere around the $100 range and up? If it
I
might,
think I think it's 600.
yeah, 600. So anything that's, let's say you sold a couch that was really good and it was $800, that's report that.
Yeah. Or you start having this magical accounting appear in your bank account. So like, oh, where'd this $1,000 come from? Strange.
Now keep in mind, this is for those who might be a little scared. If you get given money by, let's say, a family member, that money is already taxed. So keep that in mind. So with that said, don't feel so bad about that. The money that gets into somebody's hands just needs to be taxed one time over their tax season, and then if they gave it to you, that's already after tax income. You're okay.
Great. I have a few comments on organizing paperwork in that regard.
Please go ahead.
So I'm in the process of digitizing all of the relevant paperwork that I have in possession in hopes of purging it because I don't need the physical bulk of the papers. There's a couple methodologies of going about this. If you have less than 100 sheets of paper to organize, you could just open up your app, your phone, and use a scanner app. I use Google Drive because I work for a university, I have unlimited drive storage at the moment. So I just digitize the paperwork that I need and then chuck the paper in the recycling bin because I don't need to have a mass of stacks of paperwork cluttered throughout my room.
If it's personal, I'd recommend shredding it, but yeah, nonetheless, getting rid of it.
Yes. So anything identifiable or receipt oriented, I have saved every receipt to my knowledge that is important since high school in a giant tub I have under my bed. And surprisingly, it doesn't actually take up that much room. So at some point, I'm just gonna burn the receipts because obviously I don't need to keep everything for 10 years.
Yeah, we'll
And
make it a ritual. Yes.
yeah, a New Year's resolution: burn the evidence of my past. uh, but yeah, so for the stuff I bought in 2010, I probably don't need to know I spent $1,100 on a consumer camera, right? I'm pretty sure a bank statement can cover that. And receipts in general are kind of becoming useless, antiquated, just because everything's in a nice PDF version of your bank statement. So unless you're in a special exception where you paid with cash and the person happened to have a receipt book, you don't really need to save most receipts that are paid by credit card. If you, for some reason, fancy cash, then sure, it'd be good to figure out why $500 went missing this month.
It's a fair
And
amount
it's
of
like,
money.
oh, yeah. So it's like to mitigate that, personally, I don't really buy anything big ticket item with cash. I just use credit cards or checks. This is where checks would still come in handy, or Venmo. So Venmo, some people, not many, use Cash App, but Venmo is basically a subsidiary of PayPal, and both options, have a paper record. Though Venmo's is a little dicey because it forgets your information. But I have my Venmo set up such that it notifies me in an email when someone sends me a transaction. So if for whatever reason I forget why I earned $200 from a friend, it's like, oh, they're paying me for gas money, right, for a giant trip we go on. And how do I know that? Well, Venmo burned all the transactions. Oh, damn. Oh, my email saved everything. Great. So
Do the
there's
same thing.
always, right. So there's always some kind of digital backup. Uh, that's the general mindset that I've gone into. Paperwork can burn up in a fire, important information, all that stuff. Another thing that, in a similar vein with paperwork, is I use a password manager for, I think I have over 100 different website accounts that I visit, whether it be duplicates on like a Google account or a unique account like Discord or Yahoo. So rather than memorizing 100 passwords, I just get the one password manager, have a fairly difficult password that I do have to memorize, and then the rest are saved in like a vault system. And personally, I use LastPass just because, to my knowledge, they haven't been hacked ever because of the way they do the encryption. And my old method of writing down all of my passwords is now antiquated. Um, and I don't need it anymore. And I can just pray that the company exists long enough, which it seems to, and doesn't increase their prices, which it also seems to, because um, assuming they go under or everything, yeah, I'd be locked out. But that's why you do a regular download of your passwords, which you can do too, and then just have those as a paper failsafe. So there's failsafes on the failsafes, so they kind of feed into each other.
There's different phases. Yeah. A, B, C.
Yeah. Yep. So yeah, I mean, in terms of like insurance, car insurance, I was told good advice from coworkers like, oh, if you can go to specifically for AAA, you can get a lower rate than you would buying car insurance online if you just went in person and spoke to a insurance agent, because they can do some insurance foo and get your lowest possible rate that you asked for and cut your deal uh, than an internet zip code would provide you. Because believe it or not, certain zip codes charge you more for insurance just because you happen to live there. So the way to mitigate that is you go to area where there's a lower cost of living. You talk to an insurance agent and you ask for discounts, and they'll see what they can do. And in my circumstance, I went from paying $80 a month for car insurance, just car insurance, to paying both uh, car insurance and rental insurance for 60 bucks a month.
It's a good deal.
Yeah. So most people's car insurance costs, I heard one of my friends tell me that they pay 200 a month for car insurance. And I'm like, what? Well, granted, they're probably insuring a brand new car, and brand new cars, if you're getting fully insured, the price, I guess, costs that much.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
like,
that's like if you wreck it, you get essentially a new car.
yeah, but since I only plan to drive used cars for my existence, um, and won't necessarily incur a heavy cost if it's totaled, because it doesn't cost that much to begin with. I could save on that regular monthly payment. Because, for example, $60 a year is something like 720 bucks a 60 bucks a month is
Month,
720 bucks a year,
year.
versus 200 bucks a month is $2,400 a year. It's a significant chunk of change for having that new car that you also have to pay installments on, unless you bought it outright with your glorious 40 plus $1,000 lying around. So things to keep in mind when you start making money. You could follow the trend that I've seen and buy a completely factory brand new car, lease it maybe for a few years. You could do that, and you could get a pretty good deal if you like having a new car every 3 years. Or um, could save up, buy a used car, and significantly save on your insurance without having the newest bells and whistles. It's up to you. It's your money, but depends on what you're trying to save for ultimately, and how much money you're taking in.
And keep in mind, I'll actually disagree with you on the used thing from time to time, but that's coming from a guy who bought a used car, had a car wrecked because of it, and so I went on the conservative route and just said I want a car no one's driven. So
Fair enough.
so it depends on what used car you want to go. If you get a used car that's like 30,000 miles and you know that there wasn't any wreck history, that's a totally different story. Um,
Yeah.
so
Some iffy advice I'll share is you could get either a certified pre-owned car, meaning someone's actually inspected it and then certified that okay, the car works and it won't fall apart on you. Or you can buy a rental car, and depending on what rental car you can get a pretty good deal for something that's only has 30,000 miles on it, with the knowledge that not everyone drives rental cars that nicely. So you have to weigh that in mind when you're test driving or inspecting your rental car. It's like, oh, okay, is the sum average of this car's abuse uh negligible? Because imagine no one's hot rodding a minivan, right? So it's probably okay versus a Camaro. Like, come on, who buys a used rental Camaro? Not
Yeah,
happening.
from CarMax or from a Enterprise.
Yeah, you have no idea what that car has been through. Uh, Whereas maybe a less stylish car, you can hedge your bets and, well, who's gonna hot rod like a Honda Civic or Toyota Corolla? I mean,
Well,
maybe.
maybe.
Kind of depends on where you're getting this used car too. Like, obviously, certain areas people are more aggressive with their driving. So if you have a rental car area where it's known for like pushy drivers, let's say like California in general.
In general,
Uh,
yeah. Unless you're in the
uh,
Central Valley, maybe, or you're in other remote parts where it's. But if you're in Sacramento to the Bay to LA and somewhere in that triangle, chances are you got pushy drivers.
yeah, and similarly, if they're a rental driver, uh, better watch out with the quality of your car. But Hertz actually has a decent program where you can test drive, you can rent the car for 3 days, and if you like the car, you can just buy it outright after that 3 days. If not, you return the car. So what you can do during that rental process is just take the car to a mechanic that you trust and have them inspect it for all the major issues that could happen with that car. And if they give you the go ahead, then hedge your bets. If not, then, well, just keep buying that new car and hopefully you get a low APR, low interest rate.
Well, the the recon beforehand, just doing your homework.
Yeah,
That really should be most of it, and then that's like the extra safety check. Because just from it being a used car, okay, let's get a clean maintenance history. So get an oil change preventively, change out the fluids, all that stuff. So
right.
uh,
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
think that would be your solid bet to getting a medium, not really used car. Um, just getting a clean bill of health on it, and then now you've got a good reference point, an initial condition for when you need to change the oil again or replace the fluids, tires, etc.
Yep. So just side side things to be mindful of once you aren't studying anymore and you have to like think about all the extraneous things that your parents had to think about raising raising you and letting you have your childhood essentially. It was like, oh no, I need to learn this too. Now.
Yep, and it's not like there's some announcement that says, "Here, you now need to do all these things, and here's a consolidated list, and this is the timeline you need to get it done." It's more like you have no announcement, and if you did something wrong, people are letting you know that you did something wrong and making you feel like a criminal. So it's really important to be aware of the societal expectations that you're just kind of jumping into in your early 20s.
Yep. So I guess the last thing I'll ask you, Jacob, is in terms of post studying or post I guess undergraduate career, uh did you develop any significantly different or good habits that you didn't have during college? If so, what were they? If not, what did you develop in college that significantly helped you habit wise? stay focused during your work and seeing the bigger picture, the light at the end of the tunnel.
We talked a lot about this in developing proper expectations, but
True.
we need to let's unpack it better than we did then. Um, so the good habits were building trust with a wide variety of relationships and friendships. I think that is so important in getting the good deals or finding out the right information or just being cognizant of what's going on around you. And that to me was, so how do you forge trust? Okay, well, you need to show a lot of what we talked about in previous podcasts about truth and cultivating the friendship and looking out for someone as you would look out for yourself.
Integrity.
Integrity, and being able to put those together in a package where people can, it's appealing. Oh, it's a synergetic approach. They see you as these, a lot of positive characteristics put into one person that they actually would like to interact with. Oh, cool. Okay, so it's good things with someone I want to interact with. Because sometimes you can have the right characteristics, but if you're sending the wrong vibe or you're sending a signal to them that it's not appealing to interact, they might just go somewhere else. So learning how to be able to open the playing field and allow for some negotiation to happen is key. So being able to negotiate, being able to forge trust, have a wide variety of friendships, and be able to cultivate them well. And those were the social aspects, leadership being that as well, and mentorship. But the good habits, as far as the work end of the continuum, was knowing how to schedule and list what you need to get done. And these sound pretty basic, but it's sometimes harder to imagine what actually needs to get done in your head. So then there needs to be a subcategory. So here are the blunt yes or no answer questions I need to be able to get done. But then there's the scope of I may need to get this done next week. Maybe. Time will tell. Let's let that sit for a minute as a secondary priority until maybe 5 days later when, oh, now this I can see what they want done. Let me put that up higher on the priority list, and the cycle continues. As well as being with the integrity concept at work is if someone calls you, you call them back, you answer your emails, you try and be polite, and I'd say be polite and have some decent grammar. You'd be amazed how decent grammar can get you on good terms with people. So being able to write well, and instead of just, I mean, you've gotten those emails before, get it done now. Okay, that doesn't really say you very much. But if you said, hey, Julian, this is what's going on in this particular part of the work environment we need you to get done, it would be really appreciated if you could put this at the top of your list, and this is what it's going to do if you do. And here are the rewards people are going to be able to get from it. Sincerely, your boss. I mean, that's a totally different email.
Yeah.
So being able to do all those things mentioned were really good habits that I think are going to keep being that way for the rest of my life, which is I'm still thankful. That brave fool Jacob at 20 years old, man. Thanks for getting out there and helping me get to where I was today. And thank the Lord that I was even put in a position to do that with the initial conditions I had. Was there anything else you wanted to add to that, Julian?
So this touches on, like you said, the previous podcast. I believe I don't remember exactly, but essentially the 5 very fundamental things I needed to get a hold of, which I did, unfortunately, post graduation rather than necessarily all the way through college, which is like getting enough sleep, drinking enough water, uh, exercising, getting your diet down, and whatever the fifth one. But I know there was 5. Essentially, if you can dial in all those different attributes, then the rest of your goals are significantly easier to overcome. Especially if you're like depressed or depressive, if you work on those four that I mentioned, uh, you'll feel significantly better because you'll be well fed, you'll be well rested, you'll be well hydrated, and hopefully hygienic if you're taking care of yourself in that way.
You also need blood flow. That was your fifth one. Exercise.
Exercise, yes. So, and if you can't manage those, like I've said in the other podcasts, well, it's gonna be a struggle, and you need to get yourself up to a workable baseline so that when you are confronted with those challenges that we laid out in this podcast, they're not those first five are not a concern because you have it under wraps. You can worry about bigger fish to fry.
Yeah, trust is
So,
hard. It is hard to get someone to trust you when they're
right,
strangers.
exactly. Or just interacting in such a way where the other person feels comfortable. They may not trust you per se yet, but at least they're open to potentially trusting you once they get to know you. So, the fundamental habits, those are the ones that are still important, though a lot of people it's pretty implicit because they're on their rocket ship to success and they probably have all those dialed in. Um, Maybe the less obvious habits, um, as Jacob mentioned, the scheduling and time. The big theme of this podcast too is just keeping track of everything to the best of your ability. It'll pay off immensely in the future when if you get called out at work for not doing something, or if you get called out by the government inappropriately for allegedly not doing something.
Yeah, and
So
in both of our cases, we've had someone accuse us of not doing something at in a work environment, and it's just, oh, okay, we're gonna start getting that level, huh? So
yeah,
that's not good. The teamwork aspects to grading, huh? Well, let's start with the facts here that's been logged, and let's also start with how we can start restoring the teamwork, because last I checked, I kind of want to have some synergy instead of just fighting you all day. That seems like a waste of time.
right. And something we haven't mentioned that is a good habit in the real world is just having curiosity and not being like blase, meaning indifferent about your day to day, and just trying to learn different approaches to things and keep growing as an individual. Because if you find yourself in a dead end job where you just absolutely detest waking up and working for whatever organization you choose to suffer with, then try changing either that mindset or your approach to how you view your work. Specifically, like I remember telling my friends that I can find the most mundane, like trivial things extremely interesting and make it enjoyable to me to figure out more about it, like geography, space, government structures, all that dry C-SPAN stuff that no one really cares about. But if you keep your mind open and curious and not limited to just things you care about, but try to broaden your horizon, so to speak, then a lot of the trivial stuff starts to be less burdensome. Like I can imagine everyone's had a day where they're just given a packet of papers or some assignment where it's busy work and you want to turn your brain off and listen to music or whatever, right? And I guess in my case, the quickest solution, aside from automating and figuring out the quickest solution to that, is being curious about how can I speed this process up as much as possible such that I don't have to do it and I can do the task that I want to do. And if you don't have that like on your feet curiosity, I would argue, then a lot of tasks are going to feel pointless and mundane. And sometimes the humility in yourself and in life comes from doing the same repetitive task over and over again, hopefully in a more efficient way, but having like that mindset that this is fine. I can get by just doing this, and that'll be all right.
I'm so glad you brought that up about humility. That's going to be a really good endpoint because so many times people walk into the workforce with this sense of I have made it through university, which is really hard, and now I can just conquer work and it's just going to be great. Wrong. Don't do that. We've already seen enough people do it, and it's really annoying. So let's just save everybody the time. You need to relearn your environment, the geography of the work, the people who are there, the tasks of the work that is within your job scope, being able to get people to trust you, and having the humility to put all that together and start over, which is really hard because you just came at the top of a mountain and now you got to once again find yourself in a humble spot at the bottom of the food chain. Doesn't mean you're not valuable. It just means it's going to take some time to get up the hill again. But the people that I've seen that really do well are the people who say, granted that I'm on the bottom of the food chain, I will do my best to get farther because I may not stay here and I may end up in a better place than I was yesterday. So get started now because you don't have time. You don't have time to screw around in that year of resentment and saying that people don't respect you enough or value you enough. That's a wrong attitude. Maintain the humility of slowly climbing up the hill once you get your job again.
Yeah, and learn to embrace the things that you dislike in a manner that you connect it to your upward trajectory. Meaning, okay, I have to learn this thing and I don't understand it or I don't like it, but it's an obstacle in my path to achieving my version of success. Well, I guess I just have to embrace the suck of that aspect.
That's the David
And it's like,
Goggins thing. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And it's like, yes, you do. Because if you do genuinely like, let's say, filmmaking, right? If you genuinely like filmmaking, you probably need to enjoy each individual component that goes into filmmaking to some degree, or it's going to be a hellstorm when you're confronted with that individual component that's holding you back and causing your movie to fall apart. So that's a whole nother discussion. But yes, embrace the trivial and sucky aspects as long as there's a light at the end of the tunnel and you can see the bigger purpose of what you're doing.
Yeah. And for me, embrace seems so rough, but maybe a better way to say it, so I can actually swallow the advice myself from time to time, is to lean into the suffering enough where you can stand it, and that will actively cause you to be able to take on those problems. And without, of course, just embracing the suck where David Goggins is running 120 miles in one session, you know? We're
Right.
not, maybe it doesn't need to be that bad, but maybe just even leaning in to and saying, yeah, these are problems, and I'm going to help tackle them to the best of my abilities and my team. And
Yeah,
trivial as they may
actually,
be.
actually leaning in, just tippy toes first and then incremental is a better approach than just straight up dive in the deep end.
Sure. And the leaning in is just the I will actively confront. So maybe not the tiptoe into the pool, but just okay, I'm gonna do a pencil dive into this spot. Okay, I'm in the pool. Now I'm not gonna just sprint and run out of breath because I didn't breathe for the last minute. I'm gonna breathe, I'm gonna stroke, and I'm gonna slowly get to my destination. So that's the leaning into the suffering, as opposed to leaning out and no, that's not my problem. I don't have to learn this right now, or whatever excuse that you came up. My dog ate my homework. Uh, so, with
Right.
that said, that's a great place to end. Is the humility concept in work, and that could be its own podcast about how people have decided that they are more valuable than other people in such a way that it causes dissent. So that could be its own thing, though. I'm really glad we got to talk about that, Julian. Humility is so underrated.
Yeah. like you said, the podcast for another time.
So, with that being said, thank you everyone for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.
See you.